Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. In this tutorial we'll explore Python string data type. In Python, strings are immutable sequences of characters and are used to handle textual data. Here are the key things you should know about strings. They are ordered, immutable, and iterable. Learning data types in each programming language is essential to understand the code and programs. String data type is widely used in many programming and machine learning solutions built in Python specifically to store some text formatted data. In Python, you can create a string in several different ways. Let's take a look how you can create a string using single quotes. This is one of the most common ways of creating strings in Python and is very simple. Perfect. We see hello world printed. Now let's take a look how we can create a string using double quotes. This way of creating strings in Python is identical to the previous one, except now we will be using double quotes. Perfect. We see hello world printed. Next, let's take a look how we can create a string using triple quotes. This way of creating strings in Python is perhaps the most rare, as there are only a few cases when we want to use it. Enclosing characters in triple quotes will yield the same output as the previous two approaches. Perfect. We see hello world printed again. Now, the question is, why would we ever use triple quotes? One main difference of using triple quotes is when you want to create a multi-line string, where different parts of the string are on different lines in the output. For example, let's separate our hello world string into two lines. Now, let's run the code and see what we get. Perfect. As you can see, each word was printed on a separate line in the output. In Python, you can also create strings by using the string constructor. The string constructor takes any object and returns its string representation. So it will return a string representation if an object is one of the built-in Python objects, such as integer, float, complex number, Boolean, and a few others. Or it will return an empty string if the object is empty. Let's look at a few examples of string constructor with different data types. Now let's print out the values. Let's run the code and see what we get. As you can see, we got the string representation of the Python built-in data types that are integer, float, complex number, and a Boolean. An important and very useful property of a Python string is that it's an index sequence, meaning that for a string with n characters, the first character will have an index 0, second character will have index 1, and all the way up to n minus 1. A character in a string can be accessed by its index, and index can also be reversed, meaning that the first character will have an index equal to minus n, second character will have index equal to minus n plus 1, and all the way to minus 1. To make it easier to showcase, let's take a look at the following visualization. Here we can see the string Python, and each character in the string will have its own index. So the first letter P will have an index 0, Y will have index 1, and all the way to the last letter N, which will have index equal to 5. Now the length of the string is equal to 6, and as you can see, if we're counting from the first character will have index 0, and the last character will have index 5. Now as I mentioned before, we can also do the reverse. If we start from the end of the string, the last character will have index equal to minus 1. It's very important that it's not 0. It starts from minus 1 and goes all the way to the first character, which is P, and P will have index of minus 6. Now let's create this string in Python and print out its first character by using the indexes we just saw. We will access the first character of the string, first using the standard index, which is 0, and then also using the reverse index, which in this case will be minus 6. Now let's run the code and see what we get. As you can see, in both cases, the first character of the string, which is character P, was printed. Using indexes, we can also find the position of a character in a string. Let's reuse the string from the previous example, which was Python, and try to find the position or the index of Y character in a string. Using index method of a Python string, we can find the position of a character by passing the character as a parameter into it. Now, as you can see in the string, Y is the second character in the string, but if you remember, the indexing starts from 0, so the index of a second character in a string should be equal to 1. Now, let's run the code and see what we get. Perfect. As you can see, the position of Y character in the Python string has the index of 1. In one of the previous sections, we explored how to access a character from a Python string using its exact index. In this section, we'll explore how to access a range of characters, for example, first two or last two, or any other sequence of characters from a string. Recall that for retrieving characters from a string using an index, we placed it into square brackets. Slicing is using the same approach, but instead of passing a single index value, we will pass a range. A range in Python is passed using the colon, so we'll have some index from which we're slicing and some index to which we're slicing. Using ranges, we can slice the string to access multiple characters. Let's take a look at a few examples. And let's print out these sliced characters and see what we get. Here we've printed the first two characters. Here we printed the mid characters from second to fourth, meaning the second, third, and the fourth character. And their indexes are 1, 2, 3, respectively. And we've also printed the last two characters of the string. Notice that characters specified at toIndex are not included, since in Python slicing, the algorithm goes through characters until the specified toIndex and includes all characters up to that index, but not including the character under the toIndex. Recall that in the beginning we mentioned that Python string is an iterable object, meaning that we can iterate over characters in a string. Simple iteration can be performed using a for loop. Let's take a look. So we have our string that we used before. Now let's iterate over that string and print out every character on a new line. Now let's run the code and see what we get. As you can see, we've successfully iterated over a string and printed out every character of the string on a new line. In Python, we can also concatenate or combine multiple strings together to create a single string. The two most popular ways to concatenate strings in Python are using the plus operator or using the join method. Let's start with using the plus operator. Using the plus operator is one of the most common ways to concatenate multiple strings. Let's take a look at an example. We'll start by creating a few sample strings. Now we will concatenate these three strings and create a new string. And finally, we will print out the new string. Now let's run the code and see what we get. Perfect. As you can see, we've concatenated 3 strings together. If you have a slightly more complex case for string concatenation, you can try using Python join method. Python string join method allows to concatenate a list of strings to create a new string. Let's take a look at an example. First, we'll start by creating a few sample strings. Next, we're going to concatenate the strings. But before that, let's discuss the syntax of the Python string join method. So what we will do is we'll have our separator, and to that separator, we will join a list of strings. So it should look like this. So in our case, the separator is sep, and the list of strings that we have are s1, s2, and s3. Now let's concatenate these 3 strings using the separator between them. And finally print out the new string. Now let's run the code and see what we get. As you can see, we've successfully concatenated the 3 strings with a separator, where the separator is in between of each string. In Python, just as we can concatenate multiple strings into a single string, we can also split a single string into multiple strings. There are multiple ways of doing it, however, the most popular way is using the string split method, which splits a string into a list of strings based on the separator. Let's start by looking at the syntax of the split method. Let's take a look at an example. We'll start by creating a sample string. Next, we will split this long string into multiple strings based on the empty space between the words. And we'll print out the new strings. Now let's run the code and see what we get. Perfect. The result is a list of strings where the long string was separated into 4 individual smaller strings based on the empty space between the words in the long string. You can also specify a custom separator based on which you would like to split the string. For example, if our long string had commas as well as spaces between the words. Now, in this case, in order to split the string based on the comma and the space between the words, we'll simply need to add a comma in the separator based on which we split the string. Now let's run the code and see what we get. Perfect. As you can see, the result is identical to what we've seen before, even though our original string now has commas between the words, but because we adjusted the separator based on which we split the data, we were able to split the long string into individual words from that long string. In this tutorial, we explored Python's string data type and a few operations that you can do with it. As your next step in learning Python, consider watching and reading my tutorials about other Python data types and data structures, including Python numeric data types, Booleans, list data structure, dictionary data structure, set data structure, and many others. Feel free to leave comments below if you have any questions. Please like and share the video, subscribe to the channel, and stay tuned for more of my Python programming tutorials. Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. In this tutorial we'll explore Python numeric data types. In Python there are three distinct numeric types: integers, floating point numbers, and complex numbers. The numbers are created by numeric literals or as the result of built-in functions and operators. Python integer numeric type represents an integer which is a whole number. It can be positive or negative, and it can be of unlimited length. The int constructor can be used to create an integer number in Python. Let's take a look at a few examples. We can create an integer by simply assigning a number to a variable. We can do the same thing with a negative number. Also, we can use the int constructor. A good property of the int constructor is that it can convert a number from a string format to an integer. Now let's take a look at the types of these variables. As you can see, all four variables are integers. Now that we know that these variables are of type integer, let's go ahead and print them out. And we get integers 1, -2, 5, and 6. Python floating point number numeric type represents a number that contains one or more decimals, and it can be positive or negative, including positive and negative infinity. The float constructor can be used to create a floating point number in Python. Let's take a look at a few examples. Similar to integers, we can simply assign a number with decimal points to a variable. We can do the same thing for a negative number. The float constructor has a property to convert a float from string format to a floating point number. And we can also use the float constructor to create a positive or negative infinity floating point number. Now let's take a look at the types of these variables. As you can see, all variables are floating point numbers. Now that we know that these elements are of type float, let's go ahead and print them out. And we get floats 1.0, minus 1.1, 5.5, and negative infinity. Python complex number numeric type represents a complex number that contains one real and one imaginary parts, and it is constructed from two real numbers. The complex constructor can be used to create a complex number in Python. Let's take a look at a few examples. We can simply create complex numbers by defining the real and imaginary parts and assigning them to a variable. We can also use the complex constructor to create a complex number. The complex constructor has a property that allows us to convert numbers in a string format to complex numbers. In case of passing a number in a string format into the complex constructor, only one element can be passed, which will be the real part of the complex number. The imaginary part of the complex number in this case will be 0. Now let's take a look at the types of these variables. As you can see, these variables are complex numbers. Now that we know that these variables are of type complex, let's go ahead and print them out. And we get complex numbers 1 plus 3j, minus 2 plus 5j, 3 minus 7j, 1 plus 0j. Python numeric types support the following operations. The first operation is summation of x and y, and you can do it with integers, floats, and complex numbers. The second operation is the difference of x and y, and it also works for integers, floats, and complex numbers. You can take a product of x and y, and it also works for integers, floats, and complex numbers. You can do a quotient or division of x and y. It also works for integers, floats, and complex numbers. You can find the floor quotient of x and y, and this operation only works for integers and floats, and it does not work for complex numbers. Same thing with the remainder of x and y. You can do it for integers and floats, but not the complex numbers. You can find the negated or negative value of x. It works for integers, floats, and complex numbers. You can also keep the x unchanged, and it will work for integers, floats, and complex values. You can find the absolute value of magnitude of x, and it will work for integers, floats, and complex numbers. You can convert x to integer, and it works for integers and floats, as well as you can convert numbers that are in the string format. The same is true for x converted to floating point. It works for integers, floats, and numbers in string format. You can find a complex number with the real part and imaginary part, and it will work for integers, floats, as well as complex numbers. Now, when it comes to finding the conjugate of the complex number, it only works for complex numbers because you need the complex number in the beginning in order to perform this operation. You can find the pair values of the floor quotient of x and y and the remainder of x and y, and it only works for integers and floats because the underlying operations also only work for integers and floats. You can take x to the power of y, and it works for integers, floats, and complex numbers. And you can take x to the power of y by simply using two stars instead of the power function, and it also works for integers, floats, and complex numbers. In this tutorial, we explored three Python numeric data types, which are integer, floating point number, and complex number, as well as the numeric operations that can be performed in Python. Feel free to leave comments below if you have any questions. Please like and share the video, subscribe to the channel, and stay tuned for more of my Python programming tutorials. Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. In this tutorial, we'll explore Python Boolean data type. In Python, Boolean is a subtype of numeric data type, and it represents one of two values, true or false, which can also be represented by integers 1 and 0. Learning data types in each programming language is essential to understand the code and programs. Boolean data type is widely used in many mathematical, statistical, data science, and machine learning solutions built in Python. In Python, you can create a Boolean in three different ways. By assigning true or false value to a variable, by using a Python Boolean constructor, or by using a Boolean expression. Let's create two variables, assign true and false to them, and print them out. Perfect. And we get true and false printed out. This is one of the simplest ways of creating Boolean variables in Python. In Python, Booleans can also be created by using a Boolean constructor. The Boolean constructor takes a specified argument and returns its Boolean value. It returns true if argument is either any number except 0, or true, or a string. It returns false if argument is empty, or false, or none. Let's look at a few examples of Boolean constructor where it will return true. Perfect, and as you can see, it returned true for all three of these variables. Now let's take a look at a few examples of Boolean constructor where it will return false. Perfect. And as you can see, Boolean constructor returned false for all of these variables. In Python, you can also create Booleans using Boolean expressions. A Boolean expression is simply an expression that evaluates to either true or false. For example, we can compare two numbers, x and y. Let's start by creating two numbers, x and y. Next, we will evaluate these numbers using a Boolean expression. As an example, we would like to check if x is greater than y. And print the Boolean. As you can see, the expression was correctly evaluated to true since x is greater than y because 5 is greater than 3. Here are the comparison operations that can be used to evaluate a Boolean expression. We can check if x is greater than y, if x is greater than or equal to y, if x is less than y, if x is less than or equal to y, if x is equal to y, and if x is not equal to y. In Python, Booleans are often used in control structures that determine the flow of execution of a program. The simplest example is using Booleans in Python if statements. Let's create two numbers, x and y. Next, we will create a control structure using an if statement. If x is greater than y, we will print x is greater than y, and otherwise, we will print x is not greater than y. As you can see, the Boolean expression was correctly evaluated since x is greater than y and 5 is greater than 3, so we printed x is greater than y. In this tutorial, we explored Python Boolean data type, including its use in Boolean expressions and control structures. As your next step in learning Python, consider my other tutorials about different Python data types and data structures, including strings, numeric data types, list data structure, dictionary data structure, set data structure, and others. Feel free to leave comments below if you have any questions. Please like and share the video, subscribe to the channel, and stay tuned for more of my Python programming tutorials.